Jake Thompson had always lived a life of solitude. A rancher in the vast and open lands of the West, he was used to the quiet, the rhythm of the seasons and the sound of cattle in the distance. His days were filled with hard work, tending to the animals and fixing fences. There was no one to share his meals with, no one to laugh with, and no one to discuss the long days with. The ranch was his life, and he didn't mind it that way. The wind whistled across the plains, and the sun was often harsh. But Jake had grown accustomed to it. He knew the land, knew its secrets, and understood the animals he cared for. Life was simple but fulfilling, and he was content with the routine of it all. Jake didn't long for company, nor did he expect any change. He was fine on his own, working the land day after day. That was until Sarah Williams came into his life. She was a young woman, about 25, with a quiet energy about her. She had grown up in a small town, far from the ranching life, and had recently moved to the area after experiencing some personal hardships. Her family had suffered a loss, and Sarah decided it was time to start fresh, away from the memories of her old life. Sarah was nervous about working on the ranch. She had no experience with animals or farming. She didn't even know the difference between a cow and a steer, but she had a determination about her that Jake couldn't ignore. She came to him asking for a job, and though Jake was hesitant at first, he agreed. It wasn't that he needed the help. He had always managed on his own. But there was something about her, her determination, her willingness to try, that made him decide to give her a chance. Her first day on the ranch was a mix of awkwardness and curiosity. Jake showed her how to saddle a horse, but she struggled with the ropes and reins. She was more used to books and the comfort of her home, not the hard work and rough hands that came with ranching. Still, she kept trying. She worked with the horses, cleaned the barn, and helped with the animals, even though she was out of her element. Jake watched her from a distance, a faint smile appearing on his face whenever she managed to get something right. He could see she wasn't lazy, but learning this life wouldn't be easy for her. The first few days were a test for both of them. Sarah's hands were sore from working with ropes and carrying hay bales. She would sometimes complain, but never gave up. Jake didn't say much, but he respected her persistence. She was learning quickly, asking questions when she needed help and listening carefully to his instructions. As time went on, Sarah grew more confident in her work. She began to handle the horses with more skill, and even Jake had to admit that she was getting better at it. They spent long days together, often working from sunrise to sunset, and with each passing day, the distance between them seemed to shrink. One afternoon, they were working to repair a section of the fence that had been damaged during a storm. Sarah had been working hard, but she was still not used to the physical demands of ranching. Her hands were sore, and the sun had left her skin sunburned and red, but she kept going, never once complaining. She was determined to prove herself to Jake, even if he never said much. Jake had just finished fixing the wooden posts when he noticed Sarah struggling with a particularly large section of the fence. She was trying to lift the heavy beam into place, but it was too much for her. He walked over to help her, watching as she huffed in frustration. She had that look on her face, the look of someone who had given everything and still wasn't quite enough. Without saying anything, Jake reached down and lifted the beam with ease. Sarah looked up, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "I didn't mean to hold you back." Jake simply shook his head. "Don't apologize. It's not about doing everything perfectly. It's about doing the best you can," he said, his voice rough but kind. There was something about his words that made Sarah feel a little less out of place. He wasn't the kind of man to give compliments, but when he did, they meant something. It wasn't like anyone had ever told her that before, and it made her feel like she had a place here, even if she was still learning the ropes. Later that evening, after the long day's work, they sat around a small campfire near the barn. The stars above twinkled in the vast sky, and the air had a chill to it that reminded Sarah of her childhood. She had always loved the quiet of the countryside, but it was different now. There was a feeling of peace, but also of something unknown. Maybe it was the ranch life she was adjusting to, or maybe it was the quiet connection she felt with Jake. "So you grew up on a ranch?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence between them. Jake looked over at her, his face lit by the flickering firelight. "No, my family had a farm, but I've been on this land for a long time. It's all I know now." Sarah nodded, thinking about how much she had yet to learn. She could tell that Jake wasn't someone who opened up easily, but she also sensed that there was more to him than he let on. There was something in the way he carried himself, strong, quiet, and focused, that made him seem untouchable. But there were moments, small moments when he seemed to relax around her just for a second. The night stretched on, and they continued to talk about life and the world beyond the ranch. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she wasn't alone in the world. She didn't have all the answers, but she had Jake's quiet presence beside her. And that in itself made her feel like she could make it here, on this ranch, no matter how difficult the work became. As the fire burned low, Jake stood up and stretched his tired muscles. "We better get some rest. Tomorrow's another long day." Sarah stood too, feeling the weariness of the day settle in her bones. She nodded. "Thanks, Jake. I really appreciate everything you've taught me so far." He gave her a brief nod, his expression unreadable. "You're doing good, Sarah. Just keep at it." With that, they went their separate ways, each retreating to their quarters for the night. As Sarah lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, she realized something she hadn't expected. She was starting to feel at home here. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand the rancher, Jake Thompson, a little better. The connection between them was still unspoken, but it was there, in the quiet moments and the shared tasks. It was something neither of them had expected, but both were beginning to recognize. The ranch was no longer just Jake's world. It was becoming theirs. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting a warm golden light over the vast expanse of land. Sarah woke early, just as she had been doing every day since arriving at Jake's ranch. The quiet mornings had become something she looked forward to, even though the work ahead was hard and tiring. She had learned quickly that on a ranch there was always something that needed attention. But this morning felt different. There was something in the air, something that made Sarah feel like she was starting to belong. After a quick breakfast, Sarah headed outside to join Jake, who was already tending to the horses. The cool morning breeze brushed against her face, and the sound of the wind through the trees calmed her nerves. It had only been a few weeks since she first arrived, and she was amazed at how much she had learned. She was no expert, but she could feel herself getting better each day. Jake didn't say much as she approached him, but there was something in his eyes that made Sarah feel as though he was seeing her differently now. It was the same look he had when he watched her try and fail, then try again with determination. He respected that about her, she could tell. But today there was an almost imperceptible change in the way he moved. The way he stood beside her as they prepared to move the cattle. They walked together toward the barn, and Sarah could hear the sound of the hooves on the hard dirt. It was a sound she was beginning to understand, a rhythm that became familiar with each passing day. They worked side by side, moving the animals and repairing the fences that had been damaged in the recent storm. Sarah was no longer struggling with the basics. She could saddle a horse with ease now, and she handled the cattle with more confidence than when she first arrived. The work wasn't easy, but there was something satisfying about it. The land, the animals, the steady routine, it was all beginning to make sense to her. She didn't know if she would ever love it the way Jake did, but she was starting to feel that maybe this was where she belonged. The ranch had become a place of healing for her, a place where she could find peace in the simple tasks and forget the pain of her past. As they worked together, there was a quiet understanding between them. Jake didn't need to say much. Sarah could feel it in the way he looked at her, the way he showed her new tasks with patience. She noticed that he never pushed her too hard. He always let her take her time and never made her feel like she wasn't good enough. In return, Sarah gave him everything she had, her determination, her willingness to learn, and her gratitude for the chance to be here. It was the little things that Sarah began to notice more and more. The way Jake's voice softened when he gave her instructions. The small smile that would appear on his face when she finally got something right. There was a quiet bond between them that she couldn't fully explain. It was more than just two people working together. It was the silent respect they had for one another. By noon, the sun was beating down and the heat was beginning to feel oppressive. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow and took a long drink from her canteen. Jake was already hard at work on the fence, his broad shoulders glistening with sweat. He worked with a steady determination, as if he didn't feel the heat at all. Sarah admired his strength, but it wasn't just his physical strength that impressed her. It was his inner strength, the calm confidence he had in himself and his work. "I'll take over here," Sarah said, stepping forward to help with the fence. She had noticed that Jake was working harder than usual that day. He seemed more focused, almost as though something was weighing on his mind. She wasn't sure what it was, but she wanted to help, to prove that she could be more than just a beginner. Jake looked up at her, his eyes softening. "You sure?" he asked, though there was a quiet pride in his voice. He knew she was capable, but he wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of work yet. "I'm ready," she replied with a small smile, meeting his gaze. There was a moment of silence between them, and for the first time Sarah realized just how much she had grown during her time on the ranch. She was no longer the girl who had come to this place uncertain and unsure of herself. She had become someone who could hold her own, someone who could stand beside Jake and work alongside him as an equal. Jake nodded, stepping back to give her space. "All right, show me what you got." Sarah took a deep breath and got to work, her hands moving with a confidence she hadn't known she had. She knew the job wasn't easy, but she was determined to do it right. The fence needed repairs, and Sarah focused on each task, making sure every piece was secure. She worked silently, her hands moving quickly and efficiently. She could feel Jake watching her, but she didn't let it distract her. She was here to prove something, to herself, to Jake, and to the ranch. When the task was done, Sarah stepped back and surveyed the work. She had done it. The fence was repaired, and it looked as good as new. A sense of accomplishment washed over her, and for the first time since arriving, she felt like she truly belonged here. Jake walked over, inspecting her work. He didn't say anything at first, just ran his hand along the posts and the wire. Sarah held her breath, waiting for his verdict. Finally, after a long moment, Jake looked at her and smiled. "You did good, Sarah, real good." His words made her heart swell with pride. She had done it. She had earned his respect. That night, after a long day's work, they sat together around the campfire once again. The warmth of the fire felt good against the cool night air. Jake and Sarah didn't need to say much. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with a sense of mutual respect and understanding. Sarah sat quietly, staring into the flames, feeling a deep sense of peace. She had come a long way since she first arrived on the ranch. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. She had found something here. Not just a new life, but a sense of purpose. And perhaps in the quiet moments between them, she had also found something else. A connection, however unspoken, with Jake. As the fire flickered and the stars above twinkled in the night sky, Sarah felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. This ranch, this life, was starting to feel like home. And maybe, just maybe, Jake was beginning to feel the same way too.